So we'd like to welcome Henry Rees, member of staff at the IASB. Henry, you're in the area of implementation and adoption activities.
That's right.
So just by way of sort of introduction for context, the IASB spends an incredible amount of time developing new standards, all the way from the research project through to discussion papers, exposure drafts, etc. It goes back and forth, back and forth. There's an opportunity for people globally to comment and give their input. And at the end of it, they produce what they aspire to be high quality financial reporting standards. And I would suggest that they often do. So the natural question for me would be, having done all of that work and bearing in mind that accountants are some of the brightest people you'll ever want to meet, why has the IASB decided that it's necessary to have a serious focus on implementation and adoption activities to support standards that they've issued?
Well, it's a good question, and it's really, in many respects, it's responding to the feedback we've received from stakeholders over recent years, particularly through the recent agenda consultation. And that's because I think lots of people are saying, really, we shouldn't just write high quality standards. We have an important role to play in supporting them after they've been issued, to ensure that we're playing our part to get consistent application of those standards. And if you think about it, with IFRS standards being applied by many different people in many different countries around the world, if you're going to truly get that benefit of a global set of standards, it's really important that we play our part to support their consistent application. So that's why we think it's a really important part of our work. And then the other thing is, if you just think back over the last few years, we've issued some pretty major new standards. So we've issued new standards covering revenue recognition, financial instruments, leases, and most recently insurance contracts. So these really changed the accounting quite fundamentally. A lot of new requirements there, so inevitably people are saying, could we provide some help, please? So I think these are some of the reasons why we've got very involved with this. So if you like, it's a lot of stakeholders saying, could we provide more after service care, if you like, for our product, which is the standards. So we've responded to that, and we actually now have far more resources working in this area than we used to. So if I've been on the staff for a number of years, if I think back, we used to sort of set the standard, issue the standard, and the people working on that particular project, they just moved on to the next project and got on with that. Whereas now, if you take IFRS 17, we've got 6 pretty experienced staff members working, supporting IFRS 17. And overall, we're probably allocating about something like 1/3 of our resources to supporting the standards. And, I think that's the right sort of proportion. If we're going to get the benefit from, for these standards, we have to put in that sort of investment to support them.
So that's an interesting response, Henry, in the sense that it does echo what Michelle shared with us earlier in saying that it's not good enough just to put out high quality standards, but to make sure that they've been implemented globally in a consistent fashion. So I guess it leads to the question, so how exactly then are you providing that support? In which ways do you provide that support? And how is it being received?
Okay, so I think of it like our toolbox, if you like, and we've got various tools in our toolbox that we can use to support implementation. And I think one of the key things about this is it's not a one-size-fits-all. And we've learned from experience, so how we're approaching this has developed over time, and we've also tried to respond to the particular circumstances as well and the particular challenges with the standards. So if we go back a few years and we think about after we issued IFRS 15 on revenue recognition and IFRS 9, we actually used a new tool. Something we'd never done before. We actually created this a new type of implementation support group called the Transition Resource Group. And basically that was our main mechanism for supporting the new revenue standard and the new impairment requirements in IFRS 9. And essentially, this was a group of people who were really deeply involved in the implementation of the standard. So you had a lot of preparers on there and you had auditors, people really sort of into the detail. And the idea is that stakeholders could submit their questions, and then their questions would get discussed by this group in a public meeting, and anybody could then sort of see the meeting subsequently. And the idea is that the discussion of the transition resource group became a helpful educational tool, because you could listen to a group of experts talking about how to use the standard to address particular application questions. So that was what we did on IFRS 15 and IFRS 9. And because we found that was very useful, we've actually doing that currently on IFRS 17, the new insurance contract standard as well. Now with IFRS 16, we decided it was slightly different, because with IFRS 16, the new leases standard, it wasn't entirely new requirements, because although this really simplifies it, fundamentally what it was doing was taking the existing model for finance leases and applying it more broadly to all leases. So we decided not to create a transition resource group there, and what we did is we created a series of webcasts that we put up on our website, and effectively we taught people through the various aspects of the standard. So there was a series of 8 webcasts, was our main tool there for supporting the standard. With IFRS 17, we've also used webcasts. I think there's 10 webcasts. They've been very popular. I think they've been viewed something like 65,000 times on the website. And as I just said, we also have the transition resource group for IFRS 17 too. And then we've done lots of other, you might say, ad hoc things. So for example, webcasts are a really good way of us getting messages across. So sometimes we become aware of an emerging issue in practice, and so a webcast can be quite a good way of responding to that. So for example, we did a webcast recently on IFRS 9 about the prepayable financial assets. We were hearing that some ways of developing in practice that wasn't entirely consistent with how we think the word should be read, so we decided to do a webcast to reinforce the requirements in IFRS 9. And we've been doing lots of things like speaking at conferences, arranging implementation sessions at our own conferences around the world, and articles in journals and on our website, those type of things, really, the various tools. And in general, I think people are, we've had very encouraging feedback. I think people are very pleased that we are getting more actively involved in this space. So I think the feedback's been positive.
That is certainly consistent with what we're hearing. I guess one question that comes to mind is, where do you draw the line between educating and interpreting? Because I would imagine, if possible, all accountants would love the IASB to have a hotline where they could pick up the phone and say, good afternoon, Henry, this is my issue, how should I account for it, can you please help, which would be fantastic from their perspective. And on the other hand, driving a principle-based financial reporting framework, which really does place a lot of emphasis on people understanding for themselves the specific peculiarities of the circumstances that they're faced with. How do you navigate that space as the IASB?
It's a tricky line to navigate, but it's a really important line, because obviously all of these activities I'm describing, together with some of the other activities like the interpretations committee, when we're doing these things, we can't change the requirements of the standard or be adding to those requirements. So for me, the line is very much sort of saying, explaining as much as we can about the board's intention behind the requirements, perhaps drawing on materials that are already there and things like the basis for conclusions, but you firmly have to be sticking to the words that are there. And I think you raise another really important point there, which of course is, yes, we want to be really helpful and responsive to stakeholders' questions, but at the end of the day, IFRS is a principle-based set of standards, and it's important that what we do doesn't get in the way of that. So we shouldn't be getting to a level of detail where we're trying to make judgments. It's really important. We should just be trying to reinforce to people essentially what are you, when you're trying to apply the requirement in the standard, what's your objective? What are you aiming to try and do? And make sure that people have almost like, if you like, a common understanding of the requirements in the standard. And not in any way stopping people making good reasoned judgments about the application of the standards.
So just to end off on a note that could make you the most popular IASB staff member ever, and provide the answer to this famous quiz question. What is the famous Green Book all about, and how should we as accountants use it?
Well, I think you actually mean the former Green Book.
The former Green Book, there you go.
Yeah, it's a very timely question actually,
Yes.
because I think the Green Book was often seen as a bit of a niche book. You know, people aware of the red and the blue book, it's the Green Book. And actually one of the things we've done this year is we've refreshed it and reworked it to make it a more useful, practical tool for people, you know, applying our standards and auditing our standards and the like. So there are two versions of the Green Book now, and one is called the Annotated Blue Book and one is called the Annotated Red Book, and one's blue, one is red. There's still a little flash of green on it. Now the important point about it is, and why it's a really helpful book, is that it includes the agenda decisions from the Interpretations Committee in it, in context. So for example, if I'm looking at a particular standard, I will see any relevant agenda decision footnoted in the relevant, you know, paragraphs of the particular standard. So it's a really useful way of finding the supporting material coming from the Interpretations Committee. And so the only difference between those two books is that the blue book is the set of standards that are currently in application, in force, and the red book also includes the standards that effectively are not yet in effect but have, you know, have been issued by the IASB. As well as the agenda decisions, it also contains some really helpful cross-references. So, for example, if you're in the requirements and there's a relevant example or there's a relevant bit in the basis for conclusions, it's cross-referenced to help you find those particular bits. So it's a really useful tool, and I think in its refreshed, rebranded way, it'll be very helpful to people.
Couldn't agree more. It's a wonderful, wonderful tool. And again, it also ties in very well with what we spoke with Sue Lloyd about regarding the online assistance where people can reference the agenda decisions, etc. But now this is much more integrated with the standard and the basis and other useful pieces of information that people need to apply the standard.
Yes.
So it's
Can I just say one
Yes.
last thing, because obviously the Green Book, or the new style of Green Book, is
Yes.
an important publication, but just, you know, I've mentioned our website as we've been talking, and I think it's really important to note that we refreshed our website last year, and we actually have a supporting implementation page on the new website, and from there you can find all of these materials I've been talking about. So the webcasts, the TRG materials, and you know what's really good is they're organised by standard. So for example, if you clicked on IFRS 9 on the supporting implementation pages, you'll see all of the materials there, including the agenda decisions as well.
Well, there you have it, folks. No excuse to get any IFRS wrong. Plenty of resources being provided by the IASB. Henry, thank you so much for your time.
Pleasure, thank you very much.
Thank you.